There's only one thing in the world that is constant: change. Summer rolling into fall, rivers carving valleys, your little baby growing into a man. How do we measure these changes? Time. A soldier marching on in perfect step. Whether you're counting every second from a prison cell or losing track of years alongside the love of your life. But what if that's not really how it works? What if time's not a fluid reality, but more like an infinite film reel? Each frame a frozen moment, an endless succession of moments going by so quickly it gives the illusion of a graceful existence. All moments, every frame, past, present, and future, already existing. We just can't see them, except sometimes we can. Moments where the universe projector glitches and more than one moment is showing at the same time. When we walk from our suburban driveway in 2025 into a cornfield that existed on that same spot in 1950. Some people call these moments of double reality a time slip. Obviously, I have no way of knowing if the theory I just laid out is how these temporal shifts occur, but we do know they occur. One of the most famous accounts of these time glitches happened in the summer of 1901. Charlotte Ann Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, two highly educated, lifelong English academics, traveled to France to visit the Palace of Versailles. On the warm afternoon of August 10th, they set out specifically to go see the Petit Trianon, which is kind of like a private she shed for the queens, once used by Marie Antoinette. It's a decent distance from the main palace, so the two women set out expecting nothing more than a pleasant walk. As they stroll through the gardens, the path gets confusing. They're on the right path, but they end up wandering in circles as this oppressive feeling creeps over them. The landscape around them shifts. The trees and plants are totally still. Sunlight dims, and the usual sounds of birds and leaves goes quiet. They see people dressed in outdated clothing. A man in a tricorn hat who looks not like he's staring at them, but staring right through them, like they're not even there. They keep walking. They see a woman in an 18th century pale green dress sketching on the grass who gives them a quick nod, but goes right back to her work. Okay, that's better than getting blown off like the last guy. But everything just feels off. It's like everything is real, but it's not reality. They spot a small building ahead where a man in an old uniform gestures toward the entrance. The two women hesitate, sensing something is deeply wrong, as every detail, from the clothing to the stillness, feels inexplicably out of place. Suddenly, the strange atmosphere lifts. Sunlight brightens, modern noises return, and the gardens fill with 20th century tourists, while the odd figures vanish. Shocked by the abrupt change, Charlotte and Eleanor do a sanity check, but the experience feels too real to dismiss. That evening, they compare notes and decide this really happened. So they start digging into the past at Versailles. The clothing was from the late 18th century. The sketching woman resembles Marie Antoinette, known to hang out at the Petit Trianon with her sketchpad, and the building they saw existed back then, but not in 1901. Convinced of a time slip, they publish a book in 1911 called An Adventure, detailing their encounter and historical findings, sparking widespread debate among historians, skeptics, and paranormal enthusiasts that continues to this day. Okay, so no good episode on time slips can be done without mentioning Bold Street. This 1,500-foot or 460-meter long road is like ground zero for time slips. Fun fact, Bold Street is what it is because back in the 18th century, Liverpool, a bustling port city, needed rope. More specifically, ropes for ships. So rope makers would mark out a long pathway called a rope walk where they could lay out the long strands of material needed to make the ropes, which needed to be at least 1,000 feet or 300 meters long. Over time, that rope walk was built up on either side with buildings and eventually became Bold Street. At one end is St. Luke's Church, a landmark now known as the Bombed Out Church, which has a bit of its own haunted history, but we'll leave that for another episode. Probably the most famous time slip experience happened on Bold Street in July of 1996. Frank, a no-nonsense off-duty police officer, is walking toward Bold Street to meet his wife at Waterstone's bookstore. As he steps onto Bold Street, the modern bustle fades, giving way to a quieter scene. He sees the people around him wearing clothes from what look like the 50s. Men in suits and hats, women in dresses, and old vintage cars line the road. Quietly freaking out on the inside, Frank takes in as many details of the environment as he can. Everything feels real, not staged, with a vividness that is totally unsettling as he tries to absorb it. He notices that Waterstone's bookstore is no longer there, replaced by Crips, a store with 1950s-style stuff in the front window. Frank then spots a young woman in modern 1990s clothes, looking really confused, standing in front of the bookstore, now clothing store. She hesitates, but then starts walking into Crips. So Frank follows her. As soon as she crosses the threshold, the scene instantly shifts back. Waterstones reappears, modern sounds and sights flood in, and the street returns to 1996, leaving Frank shocked by the sudden change. He meets his wife inside, who has no idea of what just happened to Frank. Curious, Frank researches and discovers Crips is a real 1950s Liverpool store where Waterstones now stands, something he didn't know before. And Frank is not the only one. Not even close. He's not even the only one to have an experience in front of Waterstone's bookstore. I guess that must be the place to go. Carol is one of many other such people. One beautiful sunny day, Carol is sitting outside to eat her lunch just outside Waterstone's bookshop. She feels the sunshine dimming and hears the usually busy street becoming quieter. She looks up to see what's going on just as a man in a 1950s-style suit sits down on the other end of her bench and starts up a conversation. Carol, not ungrateful for the brief company, plays along. However, she's pretty much done with her lunch, so she gets up and turns toward the garbage can to throw away her trash. When she turns back, like literally less than 5 seconds later, the man is gone. Stunned that this guy could get up and leave so fast, Carol looks around but doesn't see him anywhere. At the same time, the sunshine comes back and the usual crowds of people reappear. Steve, a local Liverpool guy who's familiar with Bold Street because he used to work there, walks down the street to meet his partner at a bank on Hanover Street, right at the end of Bold Street, when he notices a store with a new front window display and thinks, interesting. That place has been empty for years. Well, good on them, I guess, and keeps walking. Then he sees the model shop has shifted back to its original spot from over a decade ago. Now that's really odd. He starts looking around and sees cars on the street look new, but from a couple of decades ago. And people's clothing and hairstyles are also about 10 to 15 years out of fashion. The street feels oddly quiet, and what he can hear sounds muffled. He finally makes it to the bank, meets his partner, and they go in the bank where everything seems normal. They do their business and walk back out and back onto Bold Street. Everything's normal again. The model shop is back to where Steve last saw it, and the store with the new display is empty again.
Do you want my head to explode?
Jane, a university student in Liverpool in the mid-2000s, walks down Bold Street one blustery, overcast September afternoon around 3 p.m. to meet a friend at Central Station for drinks and dinner. As she's walking, she calls her friend on her phone to say, "Hey, I'm almost there," and the two keep chatting until halfway down the street, the call drops. Looking up, she finds herself in the middle of the perfect movie set. Horses and carriages roll by, mud and straw all over the road, and people wearing elaborate gowns and suits with tails and hats. Real burning oil lamps line the street. The scene buzzes with a calm, vibrant energy as an elderly man sweeping outside a shop shoos Jane off to the side. Jane, more than a little startled, is thinking, holy crap, they gotta be shooting a movie and I just walked into their shot. After about a minute of looking around, trying to get an idea of what is happening and how she can get around it so she can get to where she's supposed to be, she glances back down at her phone to redial her friend. And when she looks up, everything goes back to normal. The horses, costumes, and lamps vanish. Jane, although slightly dizzy and very confused, keeps walking and meets up with her friend about 5 minutes later and tells her what happened. Her friend had actually tried to dial Jane back when their call initially dropped, but her call wouldn't go through. Only later, after doing some digging, does Jane find out that she isn't the only one to experience weirdness on Bold Street. Sean, who in 2006 is 19 and quickly traveling down a wayward path in life. He's just helped himself to some not-so-free merchandise and finds himself running down Hanover Street, which is a street at the end of Bold Street, away from a security guard who's chasing him. Trying to shake him, Sean turns into a dead-end street called Brooks Alley. By this time, he's done. He's totally out of breath and starts to get a tight sensation in his chest. As he just stands there gulping in air and waiting for the security guard to round the corner any second, he realizes that his shortness of breath isn't a problem with him, but with the atmosphere around him. He waits for a few more seconds. No guard. Thinking he's given him the slip, he walks back out of the alley and takes a left onto Hanover Street, heading right towards Bold Street, but soon realizes something's wrong. The road looks different. He sees cars driving by that look very old-fashioned, and people around him are wearing really odd clothes. Crossing over to Bold Street, he notices that there are traffic lights where there weren't before, and bushes growing around the building on the corner called the Lyceum that also weren't there before. He keeps walking up Bold Street as the feeling that something is not quite right gets stronger and stronger. He starts to panic. He realizes that somehow he has stepped back in time and has no idea how to get back out. Then he remembers his cell phone. He takes it out of his pocket, but no signal. Now he really starts to panic. Standing there, trying to come up with some kind of impromptu flowchart in his head of what to do when you've slipped off of your own timeline, he spots a kiosk selling newspapers. He runs over and takes a look at the front page of the Daily Post. There in bold lettering is the date, May 18th, 1967. Holy crap! He has no idea what to do. What happens if he can't get back to his own time? He keeps walking up Bold Street another block or so until he reaches the H. Samuel jewelry store and decides to try his phone again. And this time, it works. With an, "Oh, thank God," sigh of relief, he looks around and realizes everything's back to normal. However, when he looks back down the street from where he just came from, he can still see, down at the end of the road, people still walking around in 1967. By this time, Sean has seen enough and dives onto a bus to go home. Somehow, the media gets wind of the story and he gets multiple calls for interviews. And not once does his story change. But the strange tale doesn't end there. Sean must have told the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, because he even told the reporters why he was running in the first place. Gutsy move. So the reporters tracked down the security guard to interview him as well. According to the guard, he saw Sean turn down that dead-end alley, but when he turned the corner, he said that Sean had completely disappeared. One of the hardest things about these experiences is that, by their very nature, we don't have a lot of choice but to rely on the testimony of the person who experienced the slip. But what if it happened to multiple people at the same time? In September of 1979, two British couples, Jeff and Pauline Simpson, along with their friends Len and Cynthia, embark on a road trip through France heading toward Spain. As evening approaches, they decide to find a place to stop for the night and follow a sign to a small village where they discover an old-fashioned hotel called Hôtel de la Berge. They park the car, pile out, stretch their legs, and head inside. Once inside, the couples immediately notice a few things that are, let's just say, peculiar. The heavy wooden furniture looks like it's about 200 years old, and the whole place is lit with lanterns instead of light bulbs. The staff are in outdated uniforms with high-collared shirts and aprons, speaking in a formal, old-fashioned manner. Their rooms continue this old timey-wimey theme with candlelit hallways, creaking wooden floors, and beds with heavy wooden frames. Modern conveniences are entirely absent. No phones, no TVs, not even electric lights.
No phone, no lights, no motor car, not a single luxury.
Just oil lamps. The bathrooms have antique fixtures with no sign of modern plumbing. Despite the unusual nature of their lodgings, the couples have a really good time. They have dinner in the hotel restaurant where food is served on heavy ceramic plates with what appears to be hand-forged silverware. They see that other guests are dressed in period clothing, men in trousers with suspenders and women in long skirts with high-collared blouses. Yet no one seems surprised by the 4 modern people in the room. After a good night's sleep, they enjoy breakfast before they leave. They go to settle the bill and are shocked at how small it is. They thank the staff and continue their road trip to Spain with a plan to stop at the same hotel on the way back. Several days later, as they drive back through the same village, they discover something impossible. The hotel is completely gone. Where it once stood is now an empty, overgrown patch of land. Confused, they start asking anyone around, "Hey, what happened to the hotel?" But no one's heard of it. One old man who's lived there his entire life said there was never a hotel there. Well, that can't be right. So they start digging into the history records of the village. And wouldn't you know it, a small inn matching the description of where they stayed had been there, but had been destroyed in a fire over 100 years ago. But nothing had ever been built in its place. Despite their continuing search for answers, the couples never find an explanation for their night spent in a place that should not have been there. They hadn't just glimpsed a vision of the past. They had physically entered the hotel, interacted with staff and guests, eaten meals, and spent an entire night in a place that hadn't existed for over 100 years. Of course, the biggest question in all of this is, what is a time slip? What exactly is going on here? Well, obviously, we don't know. If we did, there wouldn't be a need for videos like this one. Some people think certain locations can hold imprints of history that allow people to briefly step into a version of the world that no longer exists. Or maybe it's a portal at a thin spot between 2 different dimensions. Maybe a wormhole. Most scientists would say it's all in your head, not just psychologically, but physically. Human perception of time is notoriously flexible. Think how fast a boring day drags versus a thrilling hour flying by. Explanations like temporal lobe glitches, vivid imagination, or even mild dissociation could account for time slips. For instance, epilepsy or just plain epic levels of stress can trigger hyper-realistic hallucinations, blending memory or cultural imagery like an old movie into something that looks and feels like another place and time. Sleep paralysis and hypnagogic states, whose liminal moments between wakefulness and sleep can also conjure bizarre time-bending experiences. Add a dash of confirmation bias or folklore, and a foggy street might feel like 1800s London. And while those explanations might account for some of these experiences, it does not cover all of them. It doesn't account for 4 people all experiencing the same overnight experience in a hotel that hasn't existed for over 100 years. It does not account for witnesses verifying the story by attesting to the fact that the witness disappeared, or witnesses being able to describe details about their encounter that were outside of their knowledge at the time. In any case, I think it's fair to say that we are not going to be able to come to any grand conclusions on this one at this moment. So instead, I'm going to leave you with the creepiest of all time slip encounters. Sometime before World War II, near Helvick Head in Ireland, undergraduate student Arthur Fruin spends Easter at some barracks and decides on this particular evening to sleep outside. Not long after he falls asleep, he wakes up due to feeling cold as a mist surrounds him. Even though it's totally black around him, Arthur decides it's a good idea to wander around and try to find some shelter. Why do I get the feeling that there may have been some intoxicating substances ingested earlier in the evening? In the distance, he sees the light of what he thinks is a cottage. He makes his way to the light, and as he gets closer, he discovers that the light is coming from the open hatch of a boat. Arthur looks down the hatch and sees an older man mending a fishing net across a table. The man sees Arthur and says, "Come on in." He gives Arthur a bowl of soup and tells Arthur that he's welcome to spend the night in the cabin at the end of the boat. The man takes Arthur to the cabin, makes sure he has everything that he needs, and says goodnight. Arthur makes himself a little more comfortable to go to sleep and remembers he has his sister's red school scarf on. So he unwraps it from his neck and hangs it on the cabin doorknob. Through the door, he hears the man walking back up the passageway. Feeling like something maybe hinky's going on here, he bolts the cabin door. Sure enough, the man tries to open the door to the cabin and is pissed when he figures out it's locked. He shouts, "Open the door and let me in." Arthur is totally freaking out and starts looking for a way to get out of there. He looks up and sees a skylight. He smashes the skylight, climbs out, and runs as fast as he can from the boat. When he finally gets back to the barracks, he tells the guards what happened and wants them to go back to the boat. The guards say, "Fine, we'll check it out, but in the morning." The next day, Arthur and the guards all make their way to where the boat is. When they get there, they all see the boat, but it's an old wreck. However, based on the description Arthur gave the guards the night before, it is clearly the boat he had been on just hours before. The timbers of the boat are all slimy, and there are rats running around everywhere. As they all look over the boat, Arthur finds his sister's red school scarf still hanging on the cabin door. Only later does Arthur find out that 70 years ago, the owner of that boat was hanged for the murder of an undergraduate. An undergrad just like Arthur. In August 2007, Maria is on a somber road trip with her two brothers, who she refers to as T and R, her sister and her sister-in-law. They'd all gone to Florida for the funeral of Maria's favorite uncle. The group had traveled from Georgia to Florida on Friday, August 10th, attended the wake on Saturday, and bury him on Sunday, August 12th. After a great afternoon of spending time with family and sharing memories and a lot of healing laughter, they realize now they're running late. So the group piles back into Maria's 2004 Buick Rendezvous to start the 5-hour drive back home. They all have to work the next day, so any unnecessary breaks are tossed to the wind and they just drive. Gas and a bursting bladder are the only two acceptable reasons to stop. It's a good drive. They don't get together too often anymore, so the forced rebonding time is good for them. Just after they cross the Florida-Georgia line, Maria gets an intense need to pee, like right now.
When you get a chance to pull over, sure.
She takes the very next exit, stops at a stop sign, looks in both directions for any place she can stop to use the bathroom. Nothing in sight but a 2-lane road lined with trees in either direction. So Maria makes an executive decision and turns right, thinking that they can't be too far from something, right? Bouncing in her seat, she drives for 15-20 minutes until she sees lights ahead. Oh, thank God. She drives up and turns left into the parking lot of a small red brick gas station, a grungy hole-in-the-wall spot typical of rural Georgia. She parks at the outdated pumps, jumps out, and runs inside without even looking around for anything except the restroom sign. She sees it, bolts inside, and does her business. When she's done, she comes out and her sister quickly goes in to take her place. Maria looks around and sees everyone else standing there, kind of clustered by the bathroom door, their faces the very definition of uncomfortable. Her brother T quietly gestures for her to look behind the counter. She does, and will never forget what she sees. An elderly man, thinning gray hair, skinny with sunken cheeks, a scraggly beard, and dark, deeply set, emotionless eyes. He's wearing a stained white t-shirt with visible pit marks and grimy overalls. He's just standing there, hands at his sides, staring straight ahead. No facial expressions, no movement, no acknowledgement. A sense of dread starts to grow in the pit of Maria's stomach, a feeling like something is profoundly wrong. Okay, so she thinks, well, let's just grab a couple of snacks and drinks and get the hell out of here. Store only has 3 aisles, and as she starts looking for something to eat, she sees that everything on the shelves looks outdated. Candy wrappers with old, faded labels, and everything's dusty. Even the air feels dirty and stagnant with a musty, sweaty smell. Okay, she thinks, well, food's out. I guess I'll just get something to drink. And she walks over to the coolers. The 3 coolers are just as dirty and neglected looking as everything else, with dirty glass and flickering lights. Overwhelmed by a roller coaster drop sensation in her stomach, Maria waits for her sister to finish in the bathroom, grabs her hand as soon as she steps out, and they all bolt to the car without buying anything. They pile in and literally peel out of the parking lot, taking a right to go back in the direction they came from towards the highway. They drive for 15-20 minutes, watching for the entrance to get back on Highway 75 when the same lights appear on the left. The exact same gas station. This time, the clerk is standing at the window staring directly at them. Panic erupts inside the car with everyone yelling, "Go, go, go!" Maria floors it straight ahead. There is no way she is stopping at that place again. But how could they be seeing the same gas station twice? Maria thinks, I must have missed a fork in the road or something. So they drive on for another 15-20 minutes, still looking for the highway, with everyone in the car about a hair trigger away from a full-on freak out when they see a break in the trees ahead. As they get closer, they see it is the same station, but this time it's different. It's completely abandoned. The only light around is coming from a streetlight. The windows and doors are boarded up. Ivy is growing over the entire building. Half the roof is caved in and the pumps are gone. No one has been in that building for years. But as they all look on in shock, they all see them. The fresh tire marks on the pavement where they had peeled out less than an hour ago. Everyone in the car starts freaking out, and Maria just floors it. And lo and behold, they hit the highway in just 5 minutes. The remainder of the trip is quiet but uneventful, and they all make it back home. Life moves on, but Maria never forgets that trip. Who would? But she really couldn't let it go. She even tried going back to find that building, taking different exits and driving for 20 minutes or more in each direction, but she never saw it again. A decade of development in the area certainly didn't help matters any. She knew if it was ever there, it's probably a parking lot or a strip mall by now. But she still couldn't let it go. Fast forward to March of 2025, and Maria is still trying to get answers. She emails her story to Ashley of Ashley Inc. on TikTok and YouTube, who's a really good teller of creepy stories. You guys should check her out. I'll put a link to her YouTube channel in the description. Ashley reads her story on her TikTok channel, and it goes viral. Now, as if that story isn't unbelievable enough, just wait. So Ashley shares Maria's story and everything blows up. And Ashley is getting tons of emails from people telling her about their nearly identical experiences in what sounds like the same place. That, in and of itself, is mind-blowing. But then Ashley gets a very special email. This email is from a man who calls himself John Doe, who tells Ashley, "I think the old man at that gas station was my dad." What? He goes on to tell her that back in the mid-'80s, his dad, who was a Vietnam vet with PTSD issues, had problems with drugs and alcohol. John's mom gave his dad the ultimatum: stop or leave. So he stopped. But one night in 1984, he came home from his late shift job at the gas station just off SR 378 in Valdosta, looking absolutely freaked out, and tells his family that he just saw ghosts from the future come into the gas station. John's mom, not believing a word he's saying, thinks he's fallen off the wagon and tells him to get out. So he does. He packs his bags and leaves. John does not see him again for another 16 years. As John gets older, he decides to rekindle that relationship and gets in contact with his dad. As they get to know each other again, John can't help but ask him the question that's been on his mind for all of those years. Why did you start drinking again? His dad doesn't even hesitate and tells John, "I didn't. I saw what I saw." And not one drop of alcohol was ever involved. John's dad has since passed away, but John manages to find a picture and email it to Ashley. And Maria says she's about 95% sure that the man in the picture is the man she saw behind the gas station counter that night 18 years ago. The man in the picture looks pretty happy and healthy, while the man Maria saw was much more sickly looking. But doesn't take a genius to know what a substance addiction can do to a person. So taking that into account, Maria pretty much says, yeah, that's him, and can't help but break down in tears as the emotional flood that washes over her. After 18 years of wondering, she now has proof. May not be proof for anyone else, but it's proof for her. Not just for her. Even though John's dad passed away in 2001, he now has the comfort of knowing that his dad really was telling the truth the entire time. Although comfort is probably not the right word, because he also struggles to come to terms with the idea that he cut his own dad out of his life for 16 years when his dad was telling the truth and never broke his promise never to drink again. But if nothing else, he and Maria can move forward from here, knowing that God only knows how it happened, but that it did really happen. But theirs is not the only time slip story we have today. It's not even the only gas station time slip story. In the fall of 2018, Reddit user OilBurner75, let's just call him Joe, was on a road trip to Acworth, Georgia, which is also on Highway 75, but the complete opposite end of Georgia from Valdosta. He's there to pick up some fenders for a truck he's restoring. He meets the parts seller in the parking lot of the Publix in Acworth on Baker Road, gets his fenders as planned, but decides it might be a good idea to stop at the gas station right next door and fill up before getting back on the road. Joe goes into the station and sees that everything is off, just slightly different. He goes to the counter to prepay for his gas and notices the tobacco products didn't have warning labels all over them. And the logos and everything looked different, maybe dated. Like he'd seen them before, but not for a long time. Not to mention that there was no credit card reader on the counter. And most importantly, prices are about a third of what he's used to paying. He looks around a bit and sees that the pop and the drinks in the store had expiration dates of around the year 2000. He goes to the counter and asks for a can of chew, and the woman hands him a can with an expiration date of July of 2000. So he asks her, "Why is everything in the store outdated?" The woman just looks at him and says, "It's not. That's a fresh can." Joe is so freaked out that he just leaves and heads down the road to go get gas someplace else. Takes him some time to process this whole thing before it hits him to go look it up on Google Maps. And when he does, he sees the gas station is gone, replaced at some point by a Sonic. Fortunately for Joe, he just went back in time a few years and was able to just step right back into his own timeline. No harm, no foul. But not all time-slip travelers come out unscathed. In May of 1972, 4 students, Jana North at the wheel of her father's 1971 Chevrolet Nova, Carol Abbott in the passenger seat, and Lisa Rocheford and Bethany Gordon sitting in the back seat, are rushing to get back to their campus dorm at Southern Utah University in Cedar City after spending the evening at a rodeo. They're kind of in a hurry because their house mother, Mrs. Mortensen, locks the doors at 11 p.m. and none of them relishes the thought of being forced to sleep in the car. It's after 10 p.m. when the girls cross the Utah-Nevada state line 9 miles west of Modena on Utah Highway 56, a desolate stretch of sand and sagebrush with red sandstone bluffs on the northern horizon. Once they get into Modena, Jana notices another road branching off the main highway, heading off into canyon country further north. Taking this off-road is pretty tempting. Just seems like a more direct route back to Cedar City. However, it's also going straight toward Gadianton Canyon, a place steeped in local Mormon legends of bad, evil spirits, strange disappearances, and other weird phenomena. Despite the stories of the canyon, the girls all decide to take the shortcut. They chat happily about the day's events as the car winds its way deeper into the foreboding canyon. As they drive, the dark rock walls inch even closer to the crumbling edge of the thin ribbon of asphalt. Jana, who's been chatting with her friends, suddenly notices that the car's headlights shine more brightly on the pavement. Looking closer, she sees that the center line is gone, and instead of black asphalt, they're driving on white cement. Carol points ahead, giving Jana a heads up to something it would be impossible for her not to see. The road suddenly ends in a towering rock wall. They're boxed in by the canyon and have no choice but to turn around and go back the way they came. Dang it! There's no way they're making it back in time now, but whatever. It's done is done. And despite wondering how somebody could build a road and not include a dead-end warning sign, Jana turns the car around and starts heading back out of the canyon, telling the others not to worry, they'll make better time when they get back to the highway. As she's driving, Jana begins to feel uneasy. They're still rolling along, hemmed in by red canyon walls. They should have been back out in the open desert by this time. The canyon gradually gives way to open country, but something's not right. Instead of the moonless desert they saw on the way in, they now see grain fields on the right and a line of ponderosa pine on the left. In the distance, the water of a large lake shimmers, silvery under the bright, full moon. At that moment, they feel like they've driven into a different world. The events that follow prove them right. Carol looks around in awe. This isn't Modena. Jana's going back through her memory trying to figure out how they could have gotten off track. But they must have gotten turned around because they sure didn't see any of this going in. Now the girls are on edge. They have no idea where they are, and wherever it is, it doesn't look like either Utah or Nevada. But they keep driving, just hoping they'll be able to find someone to point them in the right direction back to the highway. And sure enough, as they keep driving, they see a light ahead of them coming from a large building. some kind of roadhouse or restaurant. The place sits in the middle of a large parking lot, and a blazing neon sign on the roof spells out a message. At least that's what they assume. They don't really know for sure because they can't read it. What should be letters are brightly lit squiggles and curlicues, strangely twisted lines making the writing look like a completely foreign language. As they start to pull into the parking lot, some very tall men come out of the building. The men see the car coming in and just stop, staring at the girls. They wave their arms, shout, and point at the girls and the Chevy. Bethany giggles and says, "I wonder if they're cute." Lisa pulls out her lipstick for a touch-up and says, "Let's find out. We can ask them for directions." She rolls down the rear passenger window, and sticking her head out the window, Lisa starts to greet them, but lets out a terrified scream. Frantically rolling up the window, she tells Jana to punch it. Jana still has her eyes on the road, but Bethany and Carol turn to see what Lisa is seeing and also scream at Jana to get them out of there. And Jana's like, "What the hell is going on?" And the girls tell her they're not human. Jana stomps on the gas pedal and sprays sand as the car speeds away from the building and back onto the road. As they race down the road, passing the strange lake, having no clue where they're going, intense lights light up their car from behind. They're being chased. Bethany shouts in panic, pleading with Jana to go faster. Jana glances in her rearview mirror, and what she sees turns her blood to ice. They are being chased, but not by any vehicle that's ever been built in Detroit. 4 weird-looking automobiles are right on their tail. They're egg-shaped with 3 wheels, 2 large wheels in the front and a smaller wheel in the back. A single bright white headlight shines from the front of each car. They make a strange whirring or buzzing sound, like an angry hornet's nest, as they close in on the speeding Nova. The Nova's engine roars as its speed creeps toward 80 miles an hour. The girls yell at Jana, "Go faster! They're gaining on us!" Ahead, the road leads into another red rock canyon, but Jana doesn't hesitate and heads right into it with narrow canyon walls on either side. The Chevy's tires kick up a billowing rooster tail of dust, and whether it's because of the dust cloud or through sheer attrition, they can't see anyone behind them anymore. It only takes a few minutes before they are through the canyon and flying out the other side. But all at once, the road vanishes. The headlights show nothing but sagebrush and ocotillo. The Chevy is not made for off-road adventures and starts bouncing around. Jana hits the brakes, but too late. The Nova skids out of control and starts fishtailing, but Jana manages to regain control, bringing it to a stop in the sagebrush just a short distance from where the road ended. Then, the engine dies. Shaking uncontrollably, the girls emerge from the car. Everybody's pretty freaked out, but at least nobody's hurt. The car, however, is undrivable. 3 of its tires are flat, with numerous dents and scratches on the front bumper and a missing hubcap. Jana takes one look and says, "Dad's gonna kill me." Lisa, however, is near hysterical. She sits on the ground, hugging the knees of her bell-bottom jeans, repeating over and over again, "They aren't human." Okay, so the car's a brick, and they have no idea where they are, or if these things are still looking for them. So the girls all climb back in, lock all the doors, and wait for daylight. Once the sun is up, they start walking. And they only have to walk a couple of miles before they find the familiar blacktop of Highway 56. An hour later, they flag down a cruiser of the Utah Highway Patrol and tell their story. Utah State Trooper Vic Lundquist diligently takes their statements. He takes the girls back to their car and looks around, not sure if he's looking for evidence that they're telling the truth or that they're crazy. And right away, he sees that the tire marks begin about 200 yards from where the car came to a stop, with no tire marks at all leading from the main road, as if the car has just suddenly appeared in the middle of the desert. There are no tire tracks showing where the Chevy left Highway 56, and no one can explain how they got nearly 2 miles north of the highway without leaving any physical trace through the rough desert terrain. And no trace of the Chevy's missing hubcap is ever found. So, the moral of all these stories? If you're planning a road trip anytime in the future, make sure your phone is charged at all times and your camera lens is clean, because you never know what strange adventures could end up in your scrapbook. Time is bending all of the time. Even the simple act of someone walking past you causes the most minuscule of gravitational shifts. And gravitational shifts equals shifts in time. Now, these shifts are obviously small, like a fraction of a femtosecond, which is like 1/4,000,000th of a second. That, unless the person walking by is of substantial mass,
Get in my belly!
there's no way you're ever going to know. But what if by some cosmic coincidence, all the right factors align to send you to a different time and or a completely different place? I have a couple of interesting theories as to what might be going on here, but first, let's explore the following cases just to remind us that we'd all better be ready, because what seems to be a merging of the timeline can happen to anyone at any time. Our first stop on today's crazy train takes place across the pond in Surrey, which is just to the southwest of London. The year is 1986. It's a cold, drizzly November evening, but Dr. Malcolm Turner and his wife Evelyn really don't care. They're just heading out for a weekend escape, just the two of them. And just when they get far enough away from their farm to feel the stress of everyday life start to loosen its grip, Evelyn says, "Oh, dang it. They forgot something." So Malcolm turns the car around and starts heading back home. But when they pull back into their yard, something's not right. The lights are on in the stables. Malcolm tells Evelyn, "I turned those lights off before we left." The hair on the back of both of their necks stands up. There's a burglar in the stables. Now, Malcolm is a pretty smart guy, a successful business owner, but before he hit the corporate world, he spent a decent amount of time in one of the British Army's toughest regiments. Malcolm knows how to handle himself and isn't about to let someone raid their stables and maybe their home. He gets out of the car, grabs a club, and heads toward the stables, laser focused on finding out what the Sam Hill is going on in there. Turns out Malcolm may be able to handle the fight, but nothing could have prepared him for this. The moment Malcolm is out of the car, Evelyn gets that feeling of dread in the pit of her stomach. She knows there is a very good chance Malcolm is walking into a very bad situation. But she'd also been married to him long enough to know that there's no point in trying to talk him out of going. Once he's decided something is a done deal. And the fact that this person is messing with his property makes Malcolm just that much more determined to forcibly instruct this individual on the nuances of property rights. Evelyn watches nervously as Malcolm approaches the stables, takes a second to gather himself, then swings the door open and steps inside. Before the door closes behind him, Evelyn catches just a quick glimpse of the inside. She could see light, like firelight. Are the stables on fire? But the door swings closed behind Malcolm, and Evelyn is left alone in the car to see who comes out of that door next. Evelyn tries to control the panic welling up inside her. Not only can she not see who her husband might be encountering inside, but that also means that there may be more intruders elsewhere on the property. Maybe somebody else could be coming for her. Following an overwhelming feeling that she needs to be someplace else, she gets an idea that maybe she should drive over to the neighbors and get some help. But before she can climb into the driver's seat, the door to the stables swings open again, and a figure, backlit by the fire inside, steps out. It's Malcolm. Evelyn gets out of the car and runs to him. He's only been out of sight for a few seconds, but Evelyn can see that those few seconds have changed him somehow. He looks as if he's in shock. As she runs up to him, she smells an unfamiliar odor and can hear music coming from inside the stables. But as quickly as her mind registers the odor and the music, they fade away just as fast, and everything is quiet, including Malcolm. He's in a total daze and doesn't even seem to recognize that Evelyn is even there. Evelyn takes his hand and guides him back into the house. She picks up the phone to call an ambulance when Malcolm speaks. Put the phone down. She looks at him and can see by his face that he's come back to reality. She also sees that he looks very serious and troubled. Hang up the phone and sit down. Evelyn hangs up the phone and takes a seat at the kitchen table, waiting to hear him tell her what happened in there. But he doesn't say anything. His eyes look like they're a million miles away. He gets up, goes to the liquor cabinet, and pours 2 good shots of whiskey, one for him and one for her. What I am about to tell you now sounds absolutely ridiculous, but I just want you to listen until I'm done. When Malcolm opens the stable doors ready to do battle with what he assumes is going to be a group of drugged-out hippies, all he sees is a blinding fire. As his eyes adjust, he sees these tiny shimmering dots floating all around. As he watches these levitating points of light, they start to morph and grow into blurry shapes that slowly materialize and focus into a full picture. The stables are now full of people. A loud, raucous party of people obviously celebrating something. Some of these people are dressed, some are naked, and a bunch of them are somewhere in between. For those that are dressed, they're wearing what looks like ancient Roman attire, including some in Roman armor. The room is lit by the fire in the center and a few torches all around, and everyone seems to be more than a little intoxicated. Malcolm is just confused. What exactly is he looking at? This has to be some kind of crazy costume party. But how could they have gotten all this set up so fast? He and Evelyn were only gone a few minutes, but however they did it doesn't really matter because he is not about to put up with this orgy happening on his property. So Malcolm steels his spine a bit and heads to the person closest to him, ready to cause a ruckus. He shouts at him, "Shut it down and get out." But the guy doesn't even acknowledge his presence. So Malcolm bends over and shouts right in the guy's face. But again, no reaction. All right, now, time to take this up a notch. Malcolm goes to grab the guy's shoulder and his hand passes straight through. Malcolm likes to think of himself as a pretty tough guy, but he doesn't feel very tough anymore and starts feeling the first pangs of fear. He has no idea what he is looking at, but he now knows that he's now looking at a bunch of stupid drunk kids having a costume party. He stops staring at the guy in front of him and starts taking a better look around at everything else in the room. As he does, he notices a bunch of things he didn't see when he walked in. Racks of weapons, big pots of food, even murals painted on the walls. He looks at their clothes for a second time and sees how authentic they look, including full sets of Roman armor and helmets. These are not costumes from a costume shop. Malcolm, mind blown, starts looking all around, taking in every detail he can see. And the first thing that hits him is that the room has turned into like a TARDIS, like way bigger than the stables that he walked into. And that's when it clicks in his head. He is not in Kansas anymore.
I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
He knows that somehow he is standing somewhere in ancient Rome. A sense of wonder overtakes his fear, and he starts actively trying to soak in every detail he sees, from the racks of swords to the jugs of wine to the stitching on the clothing. He can see, hear, and even smell everything, which he actually kind of wishes he couldn't because the smell is so horrendous, like almost vomit-inducing horrendous, but he manages to keep it together. He sees a banner hanging on the wall on one end of the room. It's almost like a flag, but something about the way that it's hanging just exudes this feeling of power and almost reverence. He starts walking around trying to get someone's attention, but no one responds. He's a total ghost. Just then, the thought of Evelyn pops into his head, and a rock falls in his stomach. Holy crap! What if I'm stuck here? And then another thought pops into his head that if he's stuck here, that would really suck because he's a literal ghost here. The thought of spending the rest of his days where no one can see him and he can't even touch anything does not make him happy. Would he just starve to death? Who knows? Maybe he thought that's really what ghosts are, people stuck in some existence that's out of line with their own time and place. And something about that thought gets him to move. He has to find his way back. He is not going to be stuck here forever. He starts quickly making his way back to where he came in, but his heart stops. He doesn't see a doorway there. He is stuck. He stands there taking deep breaths, trying to think, when he sees one of the nearby soldiers look directly at him. The two men make eye contact, and Malcolm knows he can see me. The soldier goes from a happy partygoer to freaked out in a heartbeat. He starts backing away, pointing at Malcolm and shouting something in some other language that Malcolm doesn't understand. Malcolm is just as freaked and also starts backing up when he trips on something, falls backwards, and is suddenly back in his stables, which is when he leaves the stables to go find Evelyn. This encounter actually comes from a book called Encounters with the Unknown, True Accounts of Modern Paranormal Experiences by British paranormal researcher and author Colin Parsons. Parsons actually interviewed Malcolm and Evelyn himself, both together and individually, and said he found them to be very credible. And they never tried to make money off of their story. In fact, Malcolm was a PhD who was self-employed, so he and Evelyn never told anyone of the story, afraid that people would think he was crazy and he would lose business. And I think in this case, they're right to be worried. Because in today's society, where people get canceled for thinking off the beaten track, most people with weird encounters just stay quiet, going along to get along. In other words, do as the Romans do. But it's not always a skip into the past. In 1932, J. Bernard Hutton and Joachim Brandt are a reporter-photographer duo working for a German newspaper. On this particular day, the two have an assignment to go to the shipyards in Hamburg to cover some local story. Seems weird to think about shipyards in Hamburg since it's like 50 miles from the coast of the North Sea, but the Elbe River runs from the North Sea right through Hamburg, so Hamburg is actually a port city in Germany with tons of shipyards. Bernard talks to a bunch of people and gathers all the information for the story, and Joachim snaps a bunch of pictures. Assignment done. They start heading for the exit gate, but stop when they hear the drone of planes flying overhead. As the buzz gets louder and louder, they both look up to see not a few planes, but tons of them. British RAF bombers, to be exact. Before they can even register in their heads what's going on, bomb bay doors open, bombs are falling, and explosions start erupting all around them. The two men start running for the gate, hoping to get as far away from the shipyards as possible. But ever the professional, Joachim turns while running and snaps some pictures of the devastation happening in real time around them. The two men manage to escape the mayhem and book it back to the newspaper office. They start telling everyone what they saw, since it's kind of a big deal. But no one, not their coworkers, not their editor, believes them. While the editor gets on the phone with the shipyard, Joachim rushes to develop his pictures. But the pictures don't show anything. And the shipyard said, "What are you guys talking about? Everything is fine here." Bernard and Joachim are fired. Now, where Joachim went from there, we don't know. But we do know that sometime in the following 10 years, Bernard moves to London, because that's where he is on Monday, July 25th, 1943, when he picks up the morning paper. The huge headline and even bigger photo hits Bernard like a lightning strike. The British RAF has just attacked Hamburg, including the shipyards. And the picture on the front page is exactly what he and Joachim saw that day 11 years earlier. Now, usually when we hear about time slips, everything around you seems to change in an instant. But according to this encounter, sometimes they can be more of a slow burn experience. This particular experience by a daughter, her mother, and her grandmother was reported on the Weird World YouTube channel, but they didn't include any names. So for the sake of this story, we are going to call the 14-year-old daughter Molly, the mother Susan, and the grandmother Esther. It's June of 1997, and the three are on holiday from Australia on a whirlwind car tour of the British Isles. And they have it down to a science. Susan drives, Esther is the navigator, and Molly gets to enjoy the scenery from the back seat. On this particular day, they are coming from their tour of southern England and heading into Wales. The plan is to stay the night in Wales and get up tomorrow to take the ferry from Fishguard over to the village of Rosslare in Ireland, where they would continue their adventure. It's late afternoon when they hit their intended target of Cardiff, but run into trouble when they can't find a hotel with openings. By the time they figure out they're in trouble, it's after 5 p.m., so all of the tourist information places are closed. So they figure they'll just keep driving northwest toward Fishguard. They're sure they'll be able to find something along the way. Around 6:30, Susan spots a tourist information center. Esther says, "Well, that's weird. It's not on the map." And they had a really good map. She says, "I don't know about this," but Susan pulls over anyway. Turns out this place is not much more than a shack, making it seem a little less than official and a little less than trustworthy. But it's open, so Susan goes in, chats with the old man sitting at the desk who looks just slightly younger than the dilapidated building, and comes back out a couple of minutes later with directions to a place they can stay. As Susan pulls the car back onto the road, Molly and Esther see the old man get up and flip the sign from open to closed. Esther says, "It's like he was just waiting for us." The hunt for the address the old man had given them turns out to be a bit of an issue. They can't find it on the map. They actually stop and ask 4 locals who turn out to be just as confused as they are. They don't know where that address is either, but one of them thinks, well, it could be on a private road, and tells them, go this way and take that road. So Susan follows the directions the local guy had given her, which takes them off the main drag onto this much narrower road. They see another local guy whose clothes look as old as he is, and stop to ask him if he knows where this place is. The old man laughs and then tells him to keep going, make a left, and then a right, and then another left, until they see the Grand Gates. After that, they'll cross over a bridge and eventually get to a big house. Finally, someone who has a clue. Susan thanks the old man and takes off in the direction he told them to go. The directions seem to be good. The old man has made it sound like it wouldn't take that long, but in reality, it's taking forever. And the further they go, the worse the road conditions get, until the road becomes not much more than a dirt track. And the trees around them start getting thicker until they find themselves driving through a full-blown forest. But the directions seem to be good, so they keep going until they finally reach the Grand Gates. which are not quite as grand as the old man made them sound. One gate is laying on the ground while the other one is barely hanging on. The bridge he told them about is there, just like he said it would be, but it doesn't look a whole lot better than the gates. Everyone in the car holds their breath as the car crosses the bridge, just hoping it holds. Much to everyone's surprise, it does, and they continue onward until they finally catch sight of the house in the distance. One look at this place makes Molly plead with her mother. I don't think this is such a good idea. I'd rather sleep in the car than sleep here. This place looks like it came straight from central casting for a horror movie, with dead vines all over the outside, windows boarded up, and a partially collapsed roof. It looks like it hasn't been lived in years. But I guess Susan is one of those people who has to see a challenge through to the end. Or maybe she felt like the idea of sleeping in the car is her not doing a good job of taking care of her family. I don't know. But she gets out of the car and goes to knock on the door. Nothing. She knocks harder and longer, and the door opens. Inside is a girl wearing an old-fashioned brown dress. She looks at Susan, says, "Excuse me," and much to everyone's surprise, shuts the door again. A few seconds later, the door opens again, this time by a young man with long, messy hair, looking like he just lost a fight in a pig pen. He apologizes for the delay and says, "Yep, we have room for you." Everyone grabs their suitcases and goes inside, where they see every surface is covered in a layer of dust and pretty much as run down as the outside is. The young man shows them each to their separate rooms, sharing a bathroom. Molly gets into her room and sees that not only is there no TV, but there aren't even any lights. No electricity seems to be running to this room at all. She walks over to the window that's framed in big, heavy, dusty green curtains and looks out onto the garden. Amidst the chaos of overgrown everything, she sees a separate little cottage on the other side, as well as what looks like a memorial stone or gravestone. Molly decides it's time to get brave and go to the bathroom. When she finishes her business, she can't get it to flush. Great. Seeing no other choice but to get help, she ventures into the hallway and is lucky enough to run into the girl who first answered the door. The girl hurries away and quickly comes back with a wooden bucket and pours the water down the toilet, leaving again with a smile. It doesn't take too long before the sun finally sets and it's time for bed. Molly tries to settle in, but even though it's a warm summer night, she feels this ice-cold draft. She shuts the windows, but that doesn't do anything. She piles on the blankets, but she can still feel that breeze. She gets up to look for some kind of vent or something that she could maybe block, but she just can't figure out where it's coming from. The chiming clock in the hallway tells Molly it's midnight when she starts hearing noises in the attic above her. Footsteps and loud banging, like someone specifically pounding on the floor above her ceiling. This goes on all night. Thankfully, the exhaustion of the day overrides the weird noises of the night, and she finally falls asleep. But the morning light doesn't make things any better. Molly wakes up dizzy and nauseous. She tells her mom and grandma, "You guys do breakfast without me. I'm going back to bed." When they get back, Esther says, "I swear everyone here is dressed like it's 1800. When Molly finally gets herself together and heads downstairs to check out, the same young man that was dressed like Oliver Twist yesterday now looks like he's straight out of a Jane Austen novel, with perfect white puffed sleeves and an 18th century tie. As they're all checking out, casual conversation uncovers the fact that the house dates to 1690 and that the guest book was last signed in 1979. Interesting. They put their plans of catching the ferry from Fishguard to Ireland on hold and hurry out of the house on a mission to find a doctor for Molly. They find a doctor who checks Molly over and gives her some meds that should help. And that's when Molly realizes that she forgot her book in her room back at the house. And as much as she wanted to put that place behind her, she wanted her book back more. So the three set out to return to the house for the book before they make their way to Fishguard. However, once they retrace the path through the bad roads and the overgrown forest, the house that they had just left a couple of hours ago is nothing but a pile of rubble. All three of them are staring out the windows in shock, with Susan and Esther arguing about where they had to have made a wrong turn. Molly looks over at the garden, her blood turning cold as she sees that same memorial stone that she had seen from her window the night before. But she keeps this little detail to herself in case her mom might think she's crazy. But she can't stop thinking about the whole encounter. At first, she thinks the whole event to have been some kind of ghostly encounter. But the way that they were able to interact with the people and the house itself seems to go way beyond some spectral experience. As her mind replays the whole timeline of events, she comes to the conclusion that it has to have been some kind of time anomaly. She remembers how the clothing of the people they met along the way seemed to get older and older the closer they got to the house. And for those who were working there, not only did their clothes get older, but they got better. In fact, in hindsight, the entire drive there now seems like they were driving their way back further in time the further they went down the road. But if that's the case, why did no one seem surprised at their modern car, modern clothes, and modern money? Were Molly, Susan, and Esther not the first guests they'd had who looked funny? Maybe this place has been coming in and out of time since time itself. Our last story needs a special shout out to our own in-betweener Craig Taylor, who lives in Liverpool and used to work at the Waterstones bookstore that we talked about in another Timeslip episode we did. Link below. Not only did Craig tell me about a couple of possible time slips of his own, but he also brought to our attention one paranormal researcher and author, Tom Sleeman, who has written over 100 books on not only the weirdness in Liverpool, but all over the world. Time slips are not necessarily his focus, but he has been keeping tabs on the following story that teaches us that in the grand scheme of things, time doesn't really matter, and that some are better than seeing through the veil of time than others. It's 2015, and Lori, a 26-year-old from Pennsylvania, goes to Liverpool for an extended vacation to visit her online bestie, Sarah, who lives in Huyton, which is like a suburb of Liverpool. They're besties because they both love the Beatles. Sarah takes Lori around to all of the spots around town that a Beatles lover would want to see. The grave of the fifth Beatle, Stuart Sutcliffe, the Magical Mystery Bus Tour, their childhood homes, and song places like Penny Lane. It doesn't take Sarah long to figure out that Lori has a bit of the sight. The very first night Lori is there, she catches a glimpse of a family gathered around an old radio that's announcing Britain is now at war with Germany. And as fast as that vision had come, it fades away back to Sarah's apartment. One night, the girls head to a club in Chinatown. When they come back out at like 2:30 a.m., Lori finds herself on Nile Street, a street that doesn't exist anymore, but at one point was near the Anglican Cathedral. She knows something is wrong when she sees trams, Liverpool's version of the trolley cars in San Francisco, running up and down the street. As she's trying to figure out what is happening, she sees a police officer fall off the back of the tram and smack his head on the pavement. She rushes over to help the officer, who's knocked out and gushing blood from his head. Another policeman runs up, starts shouting at someone in the crowd, "Go get a doctor," looks at Lori and seems to take notice of her leather jacket, miniskirt, and purple leggings. But just then, everything changes back to 2015. Tom Sleeman has confirmed that that accident actually happened on March 5th, 1883. A few days later, Lori's out shopping on Ranelagh Street while Sarah's at work. As she passes the Midland pub, her nose starts to bleed. She starts to panic, not really knowing what to do about it in the middle of a busy street, when a policeman steps up, pinches the bridge of her nose, tilts her head back, and says, "No worries, you'll be fine in just a minute." Lori looks at him and sees it's the same police officer she saw fall off the back of the tram. She looks around and sees that Ranelagh Street has gone from pavement to cobblestone. As Lori lifts her head to see if the bleeding has stopped, the policeman asks her, "Why are you dressed like that?" Sensing there's a timeline issue happening here, she tells him she's from 2015. His response? You're one of them who keeps coming here. You're an American. Is that how they dress? She says, "My name's Lori." He says, "My name's George." And just like before, 2015 comes rushing back. And Lori is a little surprised to discover she's a tiny bit heartbroken. That night, she tells Sarah what happened and that she feels some kind of connection to this guy, like she had known him before. A few days later, Sarah comes home from work and finds this note. "Love is the key to getting back there with George. I'll be gone for some time, but don't worry, I will return. Love, Lori." Lori is gone for almost a week. Sarah is starting to freak out when Lori shows up dressed like Mary Poppins. She tells Sarah she did it. She made it back to 1883 and has been staying with George. She even shows Sarah the century-old money that she has in her purse. And that is not the last time Lori goes missing. According to Tom Sleeman, who's been following this case, she disappears for months at a time sometimes. And Tom not only claims to have interviewed Lori, but to have seen period-appropriate items she has brought back with her. And according to him, in this article about this case on Animalian.com, dated April 9th, 2020, the case is still ongoing. I, for one, would appreciate an update on the story that proves what we romantics already knew. Love can conquer even time. But can this really happen? Is there any science to back any of this up? Well, yes and no. Obviously, we don't have any direct science that can prove how any of this actually works, but we're getting closer. Like I said before, we know that time fluctuates. If you're near a massive object like Earth, time crawls compared to someplace far away. Clocks on mountaintops tick faster than at sea level by tiny fractions, like nanoseconds per day, but it's still something. GPS satellites that orbit at about 12,500 miles up, zipping around at 8,700 miles an hour, have their atomic clocks get hit with two effects of relativity that we can see happen in real time. The first is because of their speed. The theory of special relativity dictates that speed slows time. The satellites cruising around at 8,700 miles an hour slow time by about 7 microseconds per day. The second is gravity. The theory of general relativity dictates that the weaker gravity, 12,500 miles up, speeds time by about 45 microseconds per day. The two effects together make a net effect of speeding up time by 58 microseconds. So satellite engineers program their clocks to adjust by 38 microseconds every day. Without that little tweak, your GPS would drift about 10 miles off after one day. That is concrete evidence that time is flexible. Now, let's switch gears and talk about something called the Einstein-Maxwell theory. Scientists have done the math, don't even ask me to explain it, that shows that wormholes through space and presumably time can exist, but they're super unstable and want to close up right in the middle because of gravity. The Einstein-Maxwell theory suggests that electromagnetic fields can influence that gravity choke point and help keep the wormhole open. Now, what about our favorite time-slipping trail, Bold Street in Liverpool? Well, turns out that Bold Street is right on top of the Merseyrail Loop, the hub of Liverpool's underground rail system that makes a near-perfect loop right around that time-slip-prone area. Now, some researchers say that the effects of the ring of electromagnetic fields wouldn't be temporal, but neurological. They argue that the effects of electromagnetic or EM fields, which can include amazingly realistic visual and auditory experiences, are very well documented. So basically, people walking over that area and getting bombarded by the EM fields are hallucinating their time slips. Now, if the effects of the EM fields created by the Mercy Rail Loop are really propping open wormholes to create a link between the present and some other timeline, those experiences could date back no earlier than 1979, because that's when the Mercy Rail Loop went into service. But looking back on the Bold Street encounters I know of, the first account I can find comes from the early 1980s. Right on time, pun intended. But what if that's not it? What if something in the area is just thin? Or maybe EM fields from Earth itself have been opening these wormholes since the beginning of the Earth. In 2010, Chris Gibson worked at a store on Bold Street. One day, he and a coworker found a locked door in the shop's basement. Having never heard the phrase, "curiosity killed the cat," the two guys opened it up and found the entrance to an extensive underground system of tunnels and chambers. And these tunnels are old, older than the shopping district that sits on top of them. And nobody can figure out who dug them and why. But it's the messages inside, like, "it's no joke," that make me wonder if some people have discovered a terrifying truth about not just the Bold Street area, but any place where the time-space veil could be thin. Since there's no way to know how many people have stepped through this veil never to return, maybe this message found in that tunnel under Bold Street needs to be posted wherever the veil is thin. God have mercy on all who enter here. If it's one thing you guys are great at, it's letting us know how much you love your time slip stories. Time slips. So here we are with another batch of stories. Everything from Time Slip's greatest hits to your personal stories. So settle in as we start this episode with one of the all-time classic time slip stories. If you are a fan of time slips and haven't heard this one yet, you are in for a treat. If you have heard it, stick around because I found all kinds of details about the aftermath that I had never heard before. So I'm betting there's a good chance you haven't either. With that said, on with the story. It's a crisp October morning in 1957, the English countryside of Suffolk spreading out like a patchwork quilt of beautiful yellows and oranges under a bright sky. 3 15-year-old Navy cadets, William Ling from Scotland, Michael Crowley from Worcestershire, and Ray Baker from London, are on a straightforward orienteering exercise from the Royal Naval College based at Greenwich. For these kinds of exercises, students are usually given the name of where they have to go, which can be a good distance away. In this case, the boys were assigned to find Kersey, which is almost 60 miles away from the Naval College as the crow flies. So the boys presumably hopped on a train, got off at the closest stop, and started hoofing it. Maps and compasses in hand, they navigate several miles of rural terrain toward the village of Kersey. They crest a gentle hill and are met with that beautiful fall quilt of fields and meadows and the tall spire of St. Mary's Church in the distance with its bells announcing that it's time for church. They made it! Chimney smoke puffs dot the sky and cows moo in the fields. All about as ordinary as it gets. They walk down the hill and cross the small bridge into the village. But as soon as they cross that bridge, the church bells stop, and so does everything else. Nothing is moving. No birds singing. The ducks in the creek look like statues. Not even a leaf is moving on the trees. Not to mention that the trees are in full-on green bloom and not the oranges and yellows and browns of fall like everywhere else. An unnatural quiet floods their ears as a feeling of heavy air pushes down on them. William feels an overwhelming sadness wash over him, mingled with depression and a tingling feeling of being watched. The street is not so much a street, but a wide pathway of hard brown dirt. And it's empty. No villagers, no kids, no dogs, not one sign of life anywhere. The boys exchange uneasy glances. Where is everyone? As they start to look a little closer, they notice that there's no telltale signs of electricity anywhere. No phone lines or even TV antennas. And the houses just look off from what they would expect to see. The glass windows are small and dark, made with a dull greenish glass. The thatched roofs are sagging and the walls look like they're not doing a whole lot better. As they continue slowly walking down the dirt road, they notice that there aren't nearly as many houses as they thought there would be. The whole village is way smaller than they expected. As they keep going, they spot a butcher shop not far from the little stream where they had crossed the bridge. The doors open, and as the boys slowly crawl forward to take a peek inside, they are greeted with the sight of hanging slabs of ox carcasses, green and slimy, dusty and full of cobwebs. But there's no butcher in sight. Nearby, building signs are faded, and cottages are empty shells with their doors hanging open. The boys start to freak out. Michael feels a chill race down his spine, hairs standing on end. Roy, who's usually the class clown, goes pale and quiet. They start walking a little faster, hearts hammering in their chests as that ominous feeling they all feel keeps getting stronger and stronger. The stillness isn't peaceful. It's all kinds of wrong. Finally, none of them can stand it anymore, and they break into a run, heading right back in the direction they came from. And they don't stop until they get back up to the crest of that hill before they stop and dare to take a look back. As they do, they see the veil lift. They see smoke rising again from the chimneys, hear dogs barking and people talking. Kersey is back to normal. Completely wigged out, the boys scribble down the notes they need to take for their assignment and double time it back to base. They tell their superiors what they encountered, but is there the slightest chance anyone believes them? Of course not. Their superiors just shrug it off as the wild imagination of three teenage boys. Life moves on, and the three boys' lives move off in different directions. William moves to Australia in 1968 and sets up a new life there. Roll on to 1988, and he's reading a book by Andrew Carr Mackenzie from 1982 called Hauntings and Apparitions, where Andrew puts out a call for readers to contact him if they have any interesting encounters. After 30 years of keeping this story under wraps so no one would call him nuts, William sends Andrew a letter with the story of what happened to him, Michael, and Ray in 1957. And Andrew is more than a little interested. He manages to track down Michael, who coincidentally also had moved to Australia, and Ray, who had moved to London. He interviewed all three men, dug into the historical records of the village, and even interviewed some of the Kersey residents. Turns out, Kersey actually dates back to sometime before 990 AD. Andrew and William took a road trip to visit in 1990 just so William could better explain what they saw as boys as compared to what's there now. The butcher shop is no longer a butcher shop, but the building is still there. It was a butcher shop from at least 1790 all the way up to 1905, when it became a general store, and a sweet shop until 1970, when I presume it became just a regular residence and is now known as Bridge House. Now, for those who say, well, they were just city kids who weren't used to seeing what some of the outlying villages look like, pictures of the main street through town, which is called, and I love this, the street, just the street, show a quaint little village with nice buildings and nice windows. Not some village-wide pre-Victorian immersion cosplay park. The butcher shop the boys saw was not a butcher shop in 1957, and Andrew had to talk to some of the older residents of the village and dig into village records on site to find out when it stopped being a butcher shop. So even if William had decided to concoct some crazy story as an adult just for attention, he would have had to travel all the way from Australia to Kersey to dig for that information. Not likely. And Andrew's interviews of the boys are interesting. They don't tell the exact same story. Michael's version is pretty close to William's, but Ray says he doesn't remember anything really being weird about the place. And that difference in their recollection is kind of interesting. I would think that if these guys decided to make up a story involving all three of them, that all three stories would match. The fact that they don't match makes me that much more inclined to believe them. And for those who say it must have been a shared hallucination, try again. Hallucinations are the perception of sensory input, like seeing something or hearing something that doesn't correspond to reality. But that sensory perception is, by definition, a personal experience. You cannot share your perception of something that doesn't exist with someone else. So, what did they see? Obviously, no one knows for sure. But if you are ever in the area and happen to be walking along the tops of the surrounding hills and see nothing moving in the village below, maybe think twice before you decide to go visit. This next encounter comes from an in-betweener named Lainey, who's sharing a story that happened to her brother, Theo. Lainey, Theo, and their family grew up in Bellevue in Alberta, Canada, which is one of those small towns where everybody knows everybody. The broader area is known as Crow's Nest Pass, a beautiful area of the Canadian Rockies, mostly made up of 5 small towns: Bellevue, Hillcrest, Frank, Blairmore, and Coleman. This area is gorgeous, but has a bit of weirdness all its own. In 1903, part of Turtle Mountain collapsed, creating a huge rock slide that partially buried the town of Frank. It's unknown how many people actually died, but estimates are somewhere between 70 and 90 people. And then in 1914, another 189 people died in a mine explosion in Hillcrest. So, needless to say, the Crow's Nest Pass area is fertile ground for stories of hauntings and weirdness. Some say it was cursed a long time ago by the Blackfoot Indians who once lived in the territory. Or maybe the land itself was haunted before they even got there. Lainey herself has a number of odd stories of things that have happened to her, but today's encounter belongs to Theo. Theo's story takes place at the intersection of 21st Avenue and Highway 3, which is the main highway through the area. There is a stop sign on 21st Avenue that you have to stop at before turning onto Highway 3. Now, keep in mind that Theo's family has lived there their whole lives. They've all hit that intersection hundreds of times at all hours in all seasons. And since you're turning onto a highway there, it's just a given that you have to stop to look for highway traffic. So this encounter happens around 2008. It's a clear night, and Theo is on his way to Blairmore one night and hits that stop sign. As he rolls on up in his Dodge Neon, he gets the strange physical sensation like a vibration, or maybe almost like an electrical charge, as he's slowing down to turn onto the highway. Unfortunately for Theo, the sensation is more on his mind than the stop sign. He's never run the sign before, but this particular night, he's not so sure. All he can think about is the feeling, but he keeps going and makes his right turn onto the highway. As soon as he does, he sees a single red cherry light in his rearview mirror. Damn, where did he come from? And why is there only one red light and not the full-on light bar that most cars have? He can see that the car behind him looks kind of old, not like one of the modern cruisers usually patrolling the area. But whatever. He pulls into the viewing area right ahead of him and is immediately struck by a really bad feeling that something here is not right. He starts thinking, maybe this isn't a real cop. Maybe it's some crazy dude carjacker or serial killer. He thinks about just taking off, but if he's wrong and this is a real cop, then he's totally cooked. And there's something else that's off. There's a stillness to everything. No traffic, no noise. Theo can see the officer get out of his car and start walking toward him. And his feeling of dread that he is about to become a crime statistic doesn't get any better when he gets a good look. Everything about this guy is off. He has light reddish brown hair past his shoulders and a beard. He has no hat and has on a long-sleeved gray shirt with matching gray pants that looks more like the uniform out of the Dukes of Hazzard than anything worn by law enforcement around Crow's Nest Pass. Theo also notices that he walks with this weird gait, almost more like a waddle, like maybe he'd had some kind of injury in the past. But that's not quite right either. It's like the guy looks human, but doesn't walk like one. The officer barks at Theo. "You ran the stop sign." Theo hands over his license, and the officer stares at it for a minute and says, "This looks strange." But he turns and takes it back to the patrol car. Theo's a little confused. It's the same license everyone else in the area has, but he keeps his mouth shut. When the officer returns, Theo casually throws out that he's applying to the RCMP, so if there's any way that he can avoid getting a ticket, he would appreciate it. The officer lets him off with a warning, but before he turns to leave, tells Theo, "That's a strange-looking car." Theo says, "What do you mean?" The officer just says, "Never mind," and waddles away. Theo, breathing a huge sigh of relief, looks down to put his license back in his wallet. When he looks back up, all of 3 seconds later, the cop and his car are gone. There wasn't even enough time for the guy to walk back to his car, let alone get in and drive off. Theo gets out of his car and looks around, but there's nothing and no one around. The feeling of dread rushes back in, and Theo wastes no time getting back in his car and taking off. About 2 seconds after merging back onto the highway, he feels that same buzzing sensation again, but less intense this time. And then everything, the traffic noise, the whole night, goes back to normal. Theo tells his family what happened, and they do some research into trying to identify what he saw that night. The best that they can do is find a model of police cruiser that is the closest thing to the model of car that Theo saw behind him, which turns out to be a 1950s Chevy Deluxe with rounded fenders and a bubble cherry on the top. So, is this a time slip? Did some cop go home after his shift sometime in the 50s and tell his wife about the strangest looking car he pulled over in Bellevue that night? But if this was a time slip from the 1950s, why would the officer have hippie-length hair and a beard? That doesn't sound like anything I've ever seen coming out of the 50s. Theo is still creeped out about hitting that intersection on clear nights to this day. And Lainey is still a little creeped out from Theo telling her that the guy looked human, but he sure didn't walk like one. Now, we Gen Xers have been waiting for Skynet to come online for decades. We know it's coming. And this next story might just be the proof we've been waiting for. The story comes from paranormal researcher and author Tom Sleeman. In 2005, he was visited by a woman who told him the story of an encounter her husband, Jim, had back in the 50s. Jim was a policeman, and on this particular night, Jim is directing traffic at an intersection at Charing Cross in Birkenhead, which is the city right across the River Mersey from downtown Liverpool. This intersection is particularly gnarly.
Oh, gnarly!
With 5 streets all coming together in one spot. On this night, a super heavy fog rolls in. The can't see your own toes kind of thick. But that wasn't stopping people from cruising on by at regular speeds. A truck had stalled close to the intersection, so Jim is trying his best to direct traffic around it as it's getting dark and rush hour is ramping up. He even gets hit by a guy on a bike. As he's trying to control the increasing chaos around him, all of a sudden, everything goes quiet. He's looking around, wondering what happened to the flurry of cars that was just there a second ago, when he hears this low rumbling that he could actually feel through his feet on the road. It's shaking the ground enough that his teeth are chattering, but the fog is so thick he can't see anything. He can hear whatever it is, it's getting louder. He keeps looking around for the source until he sees the faint shadow of something coming toward him from Grange Road West. As the figure cuts through the fog, getting clearer and clearer, Jim could swear that what is rumbling toward him is a tank. Except this tank is huge, like big as a house huge, with a dome on the top emitting red beams of light. Jim is gobsmacked. He's never seen anything like this in his life. Between the low visibility of the fog and the low processing power of his brain in that instant, it took him almost 1 second too long to figure out this thing is heading right for him. He manages to jump out of the way of the ginormous rolling tracks at the last second, but before he can feel any relief at that small victory, he is hit with a new problem. Behind the gargantuan tank is what looks like a robot, but it's about 20 feet tall. The robot walks toward Jim, slows down, and stops in front of him. A massive metal hand reaches out like it's trying to grab him. Jim picks flight from the fight or flight options and starts running. As he looks back to see if this thing is coming after him, he sees there are more of these robot things. But before he can get any further, an explosion of sound hits him as the normal noises of rush hour come crashing back. As the fog thins a bit, Jim looks around and figures out that he is not at the Charing Cross intersection anymore. He's now across the river in Liverpool, standing next to the Martin's Bank building, about 2 miles away from where he'd been standing at just a second ago. And everything is back to normal. No tanks, no robots.
I'll be back.
Jim didn't tell anyone about his encounter except his wife, and then only after many years. And I would be in complete dereliction of duty if I did not point out that the Martin's Bank building is less than a half a mile from Bold Street. Coincidence? Doubtful. This story is from one of our own in-betweeners named Lara, who experienced something truly head-scratching worthy in 1994 in Elma, Washington. Now, to set this up, the main event happened on the 4th of July, but a couple of days prior, Lara and her cousins are hanging out on the deck of her cousin's house, chatting away, when they all see something huge streak across the sky, lighting up the whole thing. They thought it was a meteor, and it was so spectacular that they called their parents to tell them about it, and even watched the news the next day to see if anyone else had seen it. Now, we have no way of knowing whether or not that incident relates to this next incident. This particular night, 4th of July, Lara, her family, and an entire gaggle of cousins, including the A cousins, Aaron, Amber, Angela, and Anthony, pile into 2 cars and head to the fairgrounds, which is only about a 10-minute drive from their cousin's house. Everybody's having a great time walking around, watching the fireworks, running into and chatting with other kids they know from school. But eventually, the younger ones run out of steam. So Lara's dad volunteers to take the first carload back to the house of their cousins, the Lutes. So that group leaves while Lara and the rest of them stay for a few more minutes. But doesn't take long, maybe another 15-20 minutes before the fireworks are over and there's no one left to flirt with, so they too decide to leave. So everyone in the second car piles in and they take off for the Lutz's house to drop them off. When they get there, the house is all dark. They knock on all the doors and they go around and look in the back, but no one's there. Well, that's weird. The first car left at least 20 minutes before the second car did. How can they not be home? So they figure that the first car must have changed their minds and gone to Laura's house instead. So they all pile back into the car and head over there. But that house is all dark too. They go inside, but nobody's around. They call the Lutz's house to check that they didn't accidentally pass them along the way somehow, but no one answers the phone. Everyone is completely stumped. Where could they have gone? They explicitly said they were going to the Lutz's and that everyone in the second car should meet them there. At first, they were confused, but now they're getting scared. But not knowing what else to do, they all pile into the car again and head back to the Lutz's. Right before they get to the house, they pass some tennis courts with people playing. The tennis court is right behind the Lutz's house. One of the players, a friend of one of the many cousins, flags them down. They roll down their windows and the guy asks them, "Where have you been?" They say, "What do you mean, where have we been?" He says, "We've been waiting for you." Now they're really confused. So they roll on to the house only to find everyone there. Laura's dad is kicked back on the couch. The older kids are chilling in front of the TV with snacks, and one of the younger kids is asleep already. Once Laura's group, the second car, sees everyone sitting around like nothing's happened, they all figure it must be a practical joke. And they're pissed. How could you guys do that to us? We were terrified something happened and you were in the hospital or something. Everyone at the house just stares back at them. What are you talking about? We've been here the whole time. No, you haven't. We were here and you weren't. And they all said, we didn't go anywhere. We came straight home from the fairgrounds and have been here the whole time. So how could the first car have left 20 minutes before the second car, but not be at home when the second car gets there? And remember, nobody at the Lutz's house answered the phone when they called either. Laura was a little on the young side to really understand the significance of what happened to the whole carload of family that day. Wasn't until she got older that she discovered the crazy rabbit hole of time slips. And now she wonders if that's a rabbit hole to which her whole car of family members has already been to the bottom. This time slip story comes from another in-betweener named Angie. In 2006, Angie graduates from high school and immediately feels that pull to have a place of her own. So she moves out of her parents' place to a small town called Bardesville, Kentucky. One afternoon, Angie's walking around town, kind of trying to get familiar with her new surroundings. As she's walking along, this really heavy feeling comes over her. Then her head starts swimming like she's in a complete fog. When the fog clears, she looks around and sees several really old cars running up and down the street. Not a real surprise, Bardstown is certainly no stranger to the occasional collector car show. In fact, they're a pretty regular occurrence. So, no big deal, she keeps walking. But then she happens to glance into a store window and sees antique furniture. She decides to go in and check it out, but when she walks through the door, she finds herself in a bookstore. The bookstore owners say hi to her and ask if she's all right. Obviously, the confusion she's feeling on the inside must be showing on the outside as well. Angie says, "I thought this was a furniture store." The bookstore owners tell her, "Well, it used to be, but that moved down the street years ago." Angie says, "But I just saw furniture in the window." The bookstore owners actually told her, "You must have had a time slip." Not having any idea what they were referring to, and actually thinking it was kind of their bless your heart way of calling her crazy, Angie actually got mad and walked out. She looked back, but there was still no furniture. Fast forward to today, and Angie has seen numerous videos just like this one and realizes they were right. And now She wishes she could go back, not only to apologize to the bookstore owners for her rude behavior, but also because a bookstore just might have been a good place to find information on time slips. This story comes from a Redditor named Mindsmog, let's just call him Mike, who posted this just 8 months ago. When he was just a kid, Mike was riding a bus home from a friend's house. As the bus rolls along and starts its way down a hill, Mike glances out the window and sees himself walking up the hill. The him he sees is older, but he knows that's himself. For one brief second, the two Mikes look directly at each other. And then the older Mike is gone and the bus moves on. Mike thought about this encounter for weeks afterward, trying to decide if he really saw himself and what it all meant. 10 years later, Mike is walking up that same hill. He looks up from the sidewalk to see a bus coming toward him down the hill. In that second, Mike knew what he was going to see when the bus passed him. He was going to see his younger self. The bus passes. Mike looks up, and there he is, his younger version looking down at him. And in that brief second, older Mike is now vindicated. What he saw as a kid 10 years ago was real. That really happened. But then the second passed, and the bus vanished. Mike has walked that hill several times since this encounter, and sadly has never been able to recreate this magical moment. I think what I find most interesting about this story is the idea that if you knew you were going to see your younger self at some point in the future, and you only had a split second to say something, what would you say? People in the comments of the post were joking that he should have told himself, "Don't sell your Bitcoin." But I think if I had had that opportunity, the one thing I would tell myself is don't waste it. Now, this next story is from a park ranger named Molly. But it happened to her when she was a little girl. She says when she was a kid, her and her friend Lucy used to go out into the woods behind her house a lot. Molly lived in northern Maine, where there is a lot of dense, unpopulated national forest. She says the woods up there are so thick that it basically blots out almost all of the sunlight. But she and Lucy had grown up there, so they were kind of used to that, but they always did maintain a little bit of caution in certain areas. She said it was never really talked about, but it was an unwritten rule never to go more than 1 or 2 miles into that forest. The adults never said why, but nobody ever ventured out that far. She and Lucy used to make up stories about bears being as big as houses, and they used to scare each other by hiding and making growling noises while the other one would look for them. Now, Molly says one summer, a big storm came through and blew down lots of trees and started a fire in the forest a few miles from her house. Now, fire crews got it under control, but she said that some of those firemen came back not quite the same. It was like they'd been to war. And you could tell the ones who got really scared because they all had kind of the same look on their face, kind of that shell-shocked look. Lucy said they looked like walking dead people. They didn't smile or say anything when you went up to them. And most of them left town once everything was over. Now, Molly asked her parents about it, but her parents said that they didn't know anything about it. Now, once the okay was given that the woods were safe again, Molly and Lucy decided to hike out to see where the fire had been. So they hike out, and in about 2 miles or so, they start seeing burnt trees and stuff. Molly says she can remember Lucy getting really upset when they found a deer skeleton curled up at the base of a tree. and that she had to practically drag Lucy away from it because Lucy wanted to bury it. But Molly says there was something about it that just wasn't right. There was something wrong with the antlers. She doesn't remember exactly what was wrong. She just remembers that she didn't want Lucy to touch it, that neither one of them should be touching this thing. So they keep walking. And the further they go, the more burnt everything got. Eventually, there were no standing trees. And she said it was like being on another planet. Almost nothing green, just brown and black everywhere. And they're just standing there, kind of taking it all in, when they hear somebody shouting in the distance. So Molly panics, thinking it's her dad and he's going to come and tell her that she's grounded. And Lucy takes off and goes and hides behind a big rock because she says she doesn't want to get caught out here. Her parents had forbidden her to come out here at all, and she had lied to them and said that they were going to a movie. So Molly follows her behind the rock and they just keep listening. She could hear this voice getting closer and closer, and she realized they're calling for help. And she thought maybe it was just some hiker who got lost and needed directions back to town. That used to happen all the time, so she was used to helping those people out. So she starts calling out to him. And when she figures out that he's following her voice, she keeps calling to him until she sees him running at her in the distance. And as he gets closer, Molly can see that his face is all red. So Molly tells Lucy to give her her backpack because she knows that Lucy has a first aid kit. And Lucy makes this noise like she's grossed out and asks Molly if she saw his face. Molly just tells Lucy to shut up, and she starts jogging toward the strange man. So Molly and the strange man meet about halfway. And when they stopped, Molly could see that his nose, his lips, and part of his forehead were all gone. It was like they'd been sliced clean off, and he was bleeding pretty bad. So she takes a step back just because she's kind of afraid to move when he grabs her shoulders. And Molly felt like she got a shock. And the guy jumps back and just kind of starts babbling. And the only thing that Molly can understand is that he kept asking how long he'd been gone. And he asked where his unit was. But Molly just shook her head. And he looked over and saw Molly's Walkman and started screaming. And he just kept babbling and touching his face. And that's when Molly saw that he wasn't wearing the right clothing. He had on some kind of weird gray cloth jacket and like these almost formal pants. And on the jacket were these weird buttons, and it had red trim around it. And he's continuing to babble, but Molly's just shaking her head and telling him she doesn't understand what he's saying. And then she turns to her first aid kit, but he just starts screaming again and screams the only thing that she really did understand.
Don't touch me. You'll make me go back there.
And after that, he ran off, and Molly could hear him screaming all the way until she couldn't hear him anymore. So she turns around and looks at Lucy, and Lucy's just crying. So the two girls just packed up their stuff and started walking back to town. And Lucy asked Molly over and over again, what happened? Who was that guy? But Molly didn't say a word. And when they got home, Molly told Lucy she didn't want to go with her into those woods anymore. They stayed friends, but they never talked about that guy ever again. This experience comes from one of our very own in-betweeners, Dimitri. It's May 1991 in San Diego, California. Dimitri, who just turned 18, and his roommate Jason decide to go with their girlfriends, Gail and Shannon respectively, on a camping/rock climbing weekend in the high desert near Hesperia. Dimitri and Gail are true outdoors people, so they're pretty pumped. Jason just got a new camcorder for his birthday, so he's excited to try that out. Shannon is not really that outdoorsy, but is excited about the camping part as long as they don't make her rappel down cliffs with them. Friday morning, they all pile into Gail's Land Rover and are on the road by 9 a.m. and in their target area looking for a good camping spot with good climbing cliffs by noon. Most canyons and cliff faces in the area are made of sandstone, which is not really safe for climbing, especially for newbies like Dimitri and Jason. After some exploration, Gail spots a non-sandstone cliff face, and they veer off the dirt road and head in that direction. The cliff, towering 250 to 300 feet looks excellent for climbing. But now they have to find a way to the top. Takes them an hour, but they finally find a way, except that there's a 1.5 foot wide fissure in the rock in their way. So, using some 2x4s that they brought along for firewood, they construct a makeshift bridge, marking the spot with trail flags to make sure that they can find their way back. Works like a charm. At the cliff's edge, they find the perfect campsite right next to the spot where they want to do their rock climbing. They check out the stone, which turns out to be granite. Perfect! They secure the climbing ropes to the Land Rover's bush bars and chalk the tires. After lunch, Shannon sets up camp while Dimitri, Gail, and Jason rappel down the cliff so they can climb back up. Around 2 p.m., with the sun high and the air warm, they're about a third of the way back up when Dimitri feels a cool draft. Looking around, they discover a split in the cliff face, revealing a hollow, a cave emitting cool but foul air, and decide to take a few minutes to check it out. The cave's entrance is an A-frame split in the rock with bats clinging to the seam at the top and an uneven floor littered with boulders and bat guano sloping downward. The apex is about 12 to 15 feet high, widening to 8 to 9 feet at the base. Jason calls to Shannon, who lowers down flashlights and his camcorder. Seizing the opportunity, Jason videotapes the bats while Dimitri searches for the source of the cool air. With their flashlights, they find a low opening, about 2.5 feet high, with a wet floor. Gail, the smallest at 4'4", volunteers to go first, with her climbing rope attached just in case they need to pull her back out. She crawls through and reports that the initial passage is the only narrow section, opening up after that. Thankfully, there's no more bat guano, but the rock on the bottom is loose and sharp. As Dimitri follows her through, he discovers she was not kidding. The rock they have to crawl over is shale and feels like crawling across broken pottery. Jason passes the camcorder ahead and brings up the rear. Beyond the crawl space is a 15-foot drop, which they use the climbing rope to climb down. At the bottom, the air feels cooler, and they stand on larger rocks beside a trickling stream. Following the water upstream, they discover a crystal clear pool with a faint glow, like maybe the rocks are covered with bioluminescent microbes or algae. Whatever the cause, the effect is like a lit swimming pool with no visible lights. The water is so clear, it's hard to tell how deep it is, but they can see what looks like albino crawfish at the bottom. Gail tastes the water and proclaims it's safe to drink. Now, having the wisdom of years, Dimitri admits they should have tested it first, but the young Dimitri takes a sip of the fresh water as well. Water's really cold, but that doesn't deter Gail from stripping down to go swimming. She convinces Dimitri to go in with her, but Jason is content staying on the rocks and shooting as much as he can with his camera. There are stalactites and stalagmites that hang down from the cave ceiling and pop up from below the waterline of this pond that's about the size of an Olympic swimming pool. But as Gail and Dimitri swim further, they notice there's more to the lake extending on the other side of a big stalagmite. Of course, it's dark in there, and the flashlights aren't waterproof, so they can't bring them along. So they move ahead slowly, using the light of their watches. Not super useful, but enough to get by. They move past the big stalagmite and see something they don't expect to see. A sheet of water falling a couple of feet into the pool from what appears to be a carved slit in the limestone wall that is so precise that the waterfall is a perfect laminar flow. So the water looks like it's standing still and it's almost completely silent. The residual light from where Jason is barely enough for them to get a decent look at it. Gail sticks her head under it. She's under there for a while, and Dimitri thinks she's holding her breath, but after nearly a minute and she doesn't pull her head back out, he tugs on her arm a bit and pulls her back. Dimitri can't see much, but he can see the excitement on her face. She's so amped up, she can't even say anything at first, but then says, "Wow, it's dark in here. I can't even see anything." She tells Dimitri, Stick your head in there. So he does. And nothing could prepare him for what he sees. He puts his head under the ribbon of falling water and is nearly blinded by the bright light of full sunshine as his head comes out through another waterfall above a pool and under a canopy of large trees. The water below them falls about 20 feet or so into a pool of water at the bottom. He looks up and sees the deepest blue sky he has ever seen. So blue, it's almost purple. The air is more humid than the cave or the desert they're in and smells fresh and clean. He looks up at the canopy of trees trying to identify what type they are when Gale nudges him and points down toward the pool below them. On a rock at the side of the pool is what looks like a mountain lion getting a drink. And if that's not cool enough, when it's done drinking and decides to leave, instead of turning and going into the forest, it leaps across the pool to the other side, spreading out the skin between its front and hind legs like a flying squirrel to glide effortlessly to the other side. It lands and then chirps as it moves into the forest. From somewhere further in that direction, they hear another chirp like an answering call. Gale and Dimitri are stunned, but quick on their feet. Gale does her best to stretch to the side and grab a sprig of some bush that's near the waterfall, but it's too far away. Dimitri says, "Let's get Jason's camcorder." They have their heads and arms through this portal, but the rest of their bodies are still on the cave side. So they pull themselves back through and into the thick darkness of the cave pool. At first, they can't see a thing, not even the glow of the water. But eventually, their eyes readjust to the darkness. They swim back around the stalagmite to find that it's dark on the rocks where Jason is. They can still see him, but he isn't using a flashlight. They just figure maybe he's trying to get some good shots of the glowing water, or maybe even the albino crawfish. They call out to him, but his response is not what they expected. "Where have you guys been? I was starting to get worried." Gale tries to tell Jason what they saw, but she's so excited she's completely incoherent. Meanwhile, Dimitri wants to know why Jason's upset about how long they were gone. They were out of sight like 10 minutes max. Jason says, "Try again. You guys were gone for almost 45 minutes. Dimitri thinks the darkness must be messing with Jason's head or something, so they compare watches. Sure enough, they disagree by a little over a half an hour. But Dimitri's watch agrees with Gale's, and she backs him up that they were only gone about 10 minutes. Jason informs them that the camcorder is out of battery power and that the other batteries for it are in the car. He was also concerned about the batteries in the flashlights, which is why he turned them off too. He wanted to make sure that there's enough flashlight power to get back out. Dimitri and Gale decide to wait with the story of what they saw until they're back up top so they can share it with Shannon too. Gale and Dimitri get dressed and they all gather everything up and climb back out of the cave. Takes him about 20 minutes to climb back to the bat area. When they get there, it's dark outside. That's odd. They weren't in the cave more than 2 hours. Jason's watch says it's almost 5 p.m. and both Gale's and Dimitri's watches say it's getting close to 4:30. They should have daylight until almost 8 o'clock. Okay. That's weird. But they use their ropes to climb back up the cliff face as quick as they can. When they get to the top, Shannon is a mess. She has a fire going, but it's obvious she's been crying. Turns out, it's now 5 o'clock. It's not even a dark 8 o'clock. For Shannon, it's almost dawn. And not dawn on Saturday morning, but dawn on Sunday morning. To her, they all vanished inside that cave a day and a half ago. She didn't know what to do. She didn't want to move the car because all of their ropes are tied to it, which, if something had really gone wrong, could end up being their only lifeline. So she couldn't go anywhere to get any help. Being 1991, they don't have anything like GPS or cell phones. Car phones exist, and so does GPS, but not for the masses yet. And they're miles from anything even close to a paved road. So she sat there the whole time, not getting any sleep, trying to figure out what to do to get help. Gail and Dimitri tell Jason and Shannon what they saw, and Jason tries to find the other battery so he can show Shannon what he recorded. Unfortunately, the bag that has the spare battery and the battery charging station is still on the coffee table back at the apartment. They all decide to go home as soon as the sun comes up and come back next weekend. They have no problems finding the makeshift bridge over the fissure from before, getting back down to the road and back home. As soon as they get home, Jason plugs the camcorder into the TV and they all sit down, anxious to see what he managed to document of that amazing cave. The recording of the bats in the cave is pretty good, even though Jason seems to have some issue with pointing the camera in the same direction as the flashlight. The footage stops at the point where Jason turned it off to crawl through the narrow tunnel, but then the tape just shows static after that. The sort of static that used to be on scrambled cable channels where something can almost be seen, but not quite. Jason makes plans to charge all of the camera's batteries before they go back and get the mounted light set up for the camcorder. Meanwhile, Gail buys a bunch of cheap quartz watches that they plan to synchronize and then string them along the path to figure out what they can about the time anomaly. How brilliant is that? They want to get as much of their next trip documented as they possibly can. The week both flies by and crawls at an excruciatingly slow pace. By Wednesday, they can't wait anymore. They each call into their jobs, take Thursday and Friday off, and jump back into the car early Thursday morning to go back to that high desert cliff. But when they get there, they can't find the cliff. When they're finally sure they're in the right place, they get out and look around. Where the cliff face is supposed to be is just another canyon, just like all of the other sandstone canyons in the area. They start arguing back and forth about being in the wrong place. But then Dimitri sees them. They're trail flags. They start walking in that direction until they see the 2x4 planks they used as a bridge. They're on the ground at the bottom of the wide canyon area. They climb down to get them and can see that they are the same ones they brought the weekend before. They even drive around to the top using the same path as before to get their trail flags and view the canyon from the top. The cave, the cliff, the campsite, all gone. They even go back a couple more times over the summer, but the cliff and the cave never return. Jason and Shannon break up. Gail joins the Peace Corps and Dimitri joins the Navy. They lose contact with one another as they go their separate ways, and Dimitri hasn't seen or heard from any of them since that summer. After getting a master's in mechanical engineering, a 30-year obsessive hobby in quantum field theory, and many, many years of reflection on that experience, Dimitri has come to a few conclusions. The slit in the limestone wall was precise enough for the water flowing from it to be laminar in nature and make a ribbon of water which fell into the pool with very little sound. Way too precise to be a naturally occurring feature. Adding to that, the time dilation effects brings him to the conclusion that it is a series of intentionally constructed portals connected like a tunnel or conduit between locations. But even after studying quantum field theory for 30 years, he still has no clue how such portals can be constructed. That said, he can't think of any other reasonable explanation for what they all experienced. And if you think about it, the existence of portals, like the one Dimitri experienced, would explain a lot of the weird things happening in our world, like missing 411 cases and numerous cryptid sightings that seem to leave no traces, no proof that these things actually walk in our world. Even the reports of time slips, UFOs appearing from nowhere, and from people who say that our Earth is hollow. Well, maybe they just found a portal instead. So many of the mysteries that don't make much sense are easily solved if we apply the idea of portal technology. So the next time you find some nook or cranny that looks like uncharted territory, just remember, maybe yours are not the first feet to travel that path. Maybe the other feet before you just didn't come back.